Okay, so welcome to Santa Cruz and Ideas in Action. My idea for this year, theme for this year is working with standing and walking, and looking at how people do that. Because I think there's it's pretty central to what we do in everyday life. And also, as you'll see from what we do the first time, I really want to get at some kind of really central Feldenkraisian notions. Notions about when we look at somebody or when we observe somebody move, when we touch them and feel what they're doing, I think we're making a comparison. We're making a comparison of how the person is moving now to how they could move, to the possible, well-organized, optimal, whatever you want to call it, movement. So I'd like to talk about walking in that regard and look at, different aspects of standing and of walking. And talk about, well, what is well-organized standing and walking? At the conference this year in Seattle, at the opening presentation, oh boy, well, I could have a long conversation about that, but the guy who did it, he said something, it was very flippant, and he's a I don't know what he is really, a neurophysiologist and philosopher, I guess you could say. Some kind of neuroanthropologist would probably be the right word for him. But he said something about how, and he just tossed it off, falling is walking. Walking is falling, there we go, yes, walking is falling. And he said it in this very, devil may care sort of way. And I think, there are ways in which that's true. It's a very classical point of view. It was definitely Mabel Todd's point of view in The Thinking Body, and that book influenced Moshe a great deal. I'm not sure if, biomechanically, let's just say, I don't know if we have to argue about whether it's correct. It certainly isn't the big picture. It certainly isn't the full picture. If walking was falling, I'm going to get it backwards all day. If walking is falling, then you don't need push-off, right? So why do we push off? So anyways, we're going to look at some of those ideas and issues as we go along. And for those of you who haven't been here before, the idea really is to, I'm teaching in the way that I imagine that Moshe taught in Israel. I wasn't there, in the first training, or maybe I should say the second training, since Mia's apprenticeship was the first training, but in the Tel Aviv training. And my understanding from, talking to people that have been there, kind of interview research, and from one time when I was in Paris, I showed up when Miriam Pfeffer was doing her regular, I think it was like at that time, weekly supervision group, and she had her notes. I think they were Ruthie's notes or copies of Ruthie's notes, but anyway, she had these notes in Hebrew, and she would look at them and she would translate it into French and read it to us. This was from her training in Tel Aviv in the 60s. And then we would, we did some of that stuff. Well, and I think her translation's probably pretty good, the description was really it was like reading a physical therapy manual. The language was incredibly anatomical, the directions were really specific, and it was more like an ATM, do this, do this, do this, in this kind of stepwise fashion. And we're gonna do something like that, learn lessons as structures. That's the way that I would say it. So we'll learn lesson structures, and so in a way that means the lessons are going to be more ATM-like. We're going to talk about step-by-step processes, be kind of more like a recipe. Of course, a recipe you have to modify according to the ingredients that you have. And the goal here is not so that you go out and you do lesson 7 with somebody, but that you know how to take a formula, a recipe, a procedure, and apply it to different people. Okay? But at the beginning, I'm really going to teach it in a step-by-step way, because I know with this particular lesson and with the other lessons I teach, I know that they work. Some of them are lessons that have been handed down through the ages. Some of them are ones that I've adapted from FI. Some of them, I frankly don't remember where they come from. Some of them I made up Some of them I probably stole. I mean, we all stole from Moshe, so I guess it's, it's part of the tradition. When I talk about the lesson as a structure, though, often what people think about is, the person's lying on the table and you do this, and then you do this, and then you do this, and then you do that. The lesson started way before that. So when I'm talking about the lesson as a structure, I'm also talking about you could say that what happens on the table is the sandwich filling. I'm talking about the pieces of bread before and after. What do you do before the person lies down, and what do you do after they get up? And a good sandwich has to have that first piece of bread. You start with the mayonnaise and then your protein-like substance of sprouts and tomatoes, and then a piece of bread, you can't pick it up. So that first slice of bread, what happens before somebody lies down, is really important. And so we'll talk about that today. It's really important because in the beginning of the lesson, you figure out what's going on with the person. So it's important for us so that we know that what we're going to do is actually going to be helpful. Right? How do you know it's not just a good idea? But I think beyond that, and really of much greater importance, the beginning of the lesson is how you make a setting for the story. It's how you frame the lesson for the person. And so the beginning of the lesson is a way to get the person engaged in their learning. Right? And so we'll talk about how to do that. I know that I'm going to present this in a way that's fairly cognitive and about engaging the person in the process. I'm not telling you you have to do it that way. I'm not telling you it's the right way to do it. I do think most of the time it's the better way to do it. I'm going to talk about why that's so as we go along. But generally speaking, I don't think it's enough for people just to lie down and have a good experience. They have to have some way to take it with them. They have to have some way to take what happens in this altered state of consciousness, lying down on this structure, into their everyday life. And if you don't build a bridge for them, it gets lost. For most people. And the problem is, I think that most of us are not like most people. Most of us either came to the work able to take something from the table and make something in everyday life out of it, or we learned how to do that. But I don't think a lot of people who come to see us know how to do that. So I'm going to talk about that. And then, so that's one thing, talking about the slices of bread. I think that lessons, that being a practitioner requires a great deal of, let's say, technical proficiency. And by technical proficiency, I mean both what it is you do with your hands, where you put them, what shape they're in, how you touch and hold and move somebody. So there's that, and I'm going to talk a lot about that. We have a small enough group so everybody can experience what's happening. We can all work with each other and build on that. But there, as we used to say in junior high school, almost doesn't count. It's not horseshoes, hand grenades, or atomic bombs. In a lesson, there is no sort of technique. Technique is really, it's very precise. So I want to talk about that. I want to help you work with that so that it becomes kind of second nature. I don't think you should leave thinking, okay, where do I put my hands? Our attention is limited, so if you're going to spend your time in a lesson thinking about what you're doing with your hands, you're not paying attention to the other person or to how you're moving yourself. And that's the second part of technical proficiency. Hands-on technique aren't about your hands. Your hands are just the place where you meet the person. They're the interface. As those of you who know me know, I'm fond of saying ATM is giving yourself an FI, and FI is doing an ATM for two people. And so the other aspect that's going to be really important here is what we call self-use. How you organize yourself, how do you coordinate yourself so that you move well. Every time you touch somebody, all of you is there. So that's also a thing you can't sort of do. You're implied in every touch. And so we kind of talk about the martial arts of being a practitioner. And that's what I call it these days. People ask me often, do you practice martial art? I say, yeah, it's called functional integration. My goal in the practice of that art is to, every time I give a lesson, feel like I've gotten a lesson. And at the end of every day, feel better than when I started. And I've been organizing a lot of trainings. I've been talking to lots of people about trainings. And, the most common questions are, why does it, Can I practice when I'm done? Will I be able to make a living? And why does it take so long? And, I think it takes so long because it takes that long to figure out how to use yourself in a way that you'll survive being a practitioner and also be really good at being a practitioner. Okay, so that's the kind of technical proficiency part. And then mostly out of some of the conversations I had with people in these groups last year here and in New York, and out of some interviews I did, I've been thinking a lot about intuition and what that means. Part of the reason I've been thinking about that is because, I have a somewhat cognitive approach to learning, right? I think it's important to be able to think about what we're doing, to be able to reflect on it, to talk to each other about it, to talk to other people, and to talk to ourselves in a useful way about it. And often, thinking is opposed to intuition with people. And so in the conversations, I've had some very long conversations with people. And I've kind of started asking people a lot of questions about what they mean when they say, well, I'm an intuitive practitioner, or I do things intuitively. Moshe's definition of intuition was intuition is what the good grace you get from doing something long enough. That's a nice way to think about it. Most people, when they talk about their intuition and when they oppose their intuition to thinking, when I talk to them about what's happening when they're working intuitively, and I think about, as I always do, or often do, or most of the time do, I think about these categories of being. Moshe said every moment of the waking state was comprised of 4 aspects: thinking, feeling, sensing, and acting, or doing. When I think about those, in a way, what people are saying, well, I don't think when I'm working, I intuit. But when I talk to them about what their experience is like, it's incredibly sensory oriented. It's not conceptual. They don't have ideas, they're not talking to themselves. Some people make pictures in their head, some people don't. But people are very oriented to their sensory experience and to the sensation of what's happening with somebody else. Now, Moshe said when he did FI, he didn't think in words. Well, if you don't think in words, what that leaves you are sensations and pictures and sounds that aren't words to think in. And so I'm really interested in what we're feeling for, or what we're sensing for when we work with somebody. And I'm really interested, in some ways, I think I've spent the last 15 years really emphasizing the thinking and conceptual part, because I thought there was a real lack of that in the community and a lack of appreciation of that. I think these days I'm more interested in representing the full spectrum than in kind of taking the argument against something. So I'm not in the antithesis mode, so I'm more in synthesis mode these days. But I'm really interested in what is it that we do really well? What kinds of things do you notice? And how do we build on that? And that's what we'll work on here too. So though there are concepts, and though we'll have words and pictures and ideas, what I'm after is, what you do during the lesson, which, isn't very conceptual. I'm not here to create another radio station in your head. And all the stuff that I talk about when I'm doing, I'm mostly talking about to help you notice things. Because when I'm working, it isn't conceptual. There are a few ideas that bubble up and some guiding lines, but thinking while you're working is like driving with your matte plaster to the windshield. It doesn't work. So the idea is to eventually get rid of the thinking, or to be able to put the map down, to know the road well enough so you don't have to stop all the time at least and look at it. And that's what I'm after. Now that takes a while. That takes a process of apprenticeship. It's not going to happen automatically. And my experience of people when they're learning this, with me and with other people, and my experience of learning it, is that it does take some effort, conceptually, to stay on track. Some sense of what the structure of the lesson is, and at least at the beginning, coloring within the lines so you understand what that is. That's not to say that you can't be creative later, but it's just the idea here in studying these structures and learning the techniques, figuring how to use yourself, and knowing how things are put together, knowing what's coming next, all of that, is so that you can really pay attention to what's happening in the moment, and so that you can learn what questions to ask. You can learn to recognize what you're good at. You can develop the things you aren't good at, so that when you're home working, you don't have to think about that. You know, that'll take different routes. Well, I'll take different routes in the way of getting there, but that's what I'm at.